Cut a piece of paper measuring 30 by 30 centimeters. If you work with inches, you can make it 12 by 12 inches. This will be the template for all your future samples. Place this under the bubble wrap so it doesn't get wet. If necessary, tape it to the table to prevent it from moving. Lay out your wool and any decorations you need to add. Use exactly the same type of wool and number of layers you intend to use in your project. Felt the sample using the fulling methods you prefer to work with. And full it completely. Okay, so now that you have your sample, let's look at the shrinkage rate. Measure the final size of your sample both horizontally and vertically. Let's say the piece measures 16.5 by 16.5 centimeters. The next step is to divide the initial size by the final size. So divide the initial size by the final size. In this case, the initial size was 30 centimeters and the final size was 16.5. So this equals 1.8. In this case, your shrinkage rate would be 1.8. Okay, so now you're asking, my shrinkage rate is 1.8, what now? Let's say you now want to make a table runner that measures 40 by 100 centimeters. So this would be your final size. You now need to multiply both measures by 1.8, which is the shrinkage rate you've just determined. So 40 times 1.8 equals 72, and 100 times 1.8 equals 180. That means you need to make your layout 72 by 180 centimeters. If you were to make a pattern for your table runner, this is exactly how big it would need to be. But of course, you'll need to use the same wool type, the same layer thickness, and everything else you've done with the sample. And this is the way you know that after felting, you'll get a final size of 40 by 100 centimeters, just like you intended. Now, let's address a couple of frequent questions felt makers have about their samples. What if I started with a square, so 30 by 30 centimeters, but my final sample turned out to be a rectangle? There are two reasons why your sample has a different length and width after shrinkage, even though you started out with a square. You have an odd number of layers. So if you laid 3 layers, 2 horizontal and 1 vertical, your felt will shrink more in one direction. This isn't a problem. In fact, that's exactly what you would expect. But you do have to take that into account when working with an odd number of layers. You have an even number of layers. If your felt shrank more in one direction and you have an even number of layers, that means you fold more in that direction. In this case, you can always fold a little bit more afterwards to make your sample even. Now, you need to watch for this during the fulling process. Keep a measuring tape or a pattern with the final size at hand to control your fulling. Remember that when something is handmade, you might not always do exactly the same thing for all sides. We're not machines. For example, we can make a bit more pressure on the felt sometimes. But that can be easily corrected if you control the size of your felt during the fulling. My final sample isn't square, so how do I calculate the shrinkage rate? If the difference is small, for example, one side measures 16 centimeters and the other 17 centimeters, you can use the average 16.5 centimeters. If the difference is big and you have an odd number of layers, calculate 2 shrinkage rates, one horizontal and one vertical, and work with these 2 in your project. If the difference is big and you have an even number of layers, something went wrong. So you should either fold more where it's necessary or just redo the sample.